Hi, Carol. How
Hello.
are you?
I'm good. You're on my calendar for 6:30.
You
That's
know
fine.
what?
I can
I
hear
am
that.
so sorry. I'm early. Is now a good time?
Yeah, now it works.
Okay. Let's make sure I'm not inconveniencing you. I'm so sorry about
Yeah.
that.
Deb just texted me and she's like, Tia's waiting for you online. I'm like, what?
That is all my fault. And I was just rushing because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm late. And here I am, early. And it all works out. So how are you doing?
I am admiring that blouse. Oh, I love
Thank you.
that.
I thought I was gonna embody my inner Carole Baskin. So thank you so much for joining me today. For those who are just joining, my name is Tia, and I am the host of Talks with Tia. And my guest today probably does not need an introduction. You might have seen her on Netflix, Tiger King, Dancing with the Stars. And you might have seen her on a lot of memes as well. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. Let everybody know who you are.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Carole Baskin from Big Cat Rescue. And thank you for having me, Tia.
Hey, thank you. And again, I apologize for being early. So what have you been up to these days, Carole?
Well, we just had a hurricane.
Oh, I
So
saw that on your page. Wow. Is everything okay?
it's fine. It was a tropical storm by the time it passed by Tampa, so that was good. It just brought a lot of water, and oh my gosh, I mean, everything was just so flooded, but today you could hardly tell it ever happened.
Wow. So you said you like my blouse. I actually like a lot of your style too. I was looking through your page. Like, where do you shop?
When I was doing Dancing with the Stars, this company called honeymeusa.com sent me a whole bushel basket full of these kind of shirts, and I love them. And so I've been wearing almost nothing but their shirts since they sent all those to me, and they were almost all in cat prints.
Well, you look pretty. But before we get into Big Cats and Tiger King, I do want to know, how was your experience with Dancing with the Stars?
That was probably physically the hardest thing I've ever done. And I had never danced before because it was considered a sin in my family to dance or swim or um, uh, all kinds of things were considered a sin in my family. So I thought, well, how hard can it be, right? I was so wrong. It's really, really hard. And
I can imagine.
those people are some athletes, man. They are just amazing.
Well, you didn't do too bad. You didn't do too bad. So, being that you are a big cats activist and a big animal activist, how did you get into that? Like, did you just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm just into this"? So, tell us how you got into that.
When I was about 8 years old, my grandmother took my cat to the shelter and she told me that it was going to get a new home, her and her baby. She had a whole litter of kittens. And I learned as I got older that most of the cats in shelters end up being killed. And so I made it my life's mission to end the killing of healthy kittens in shelters due to overpopulation. And so I got totally off track when I rescued the first bobcat in 1992 because I thought, well, I can keep her from being killed for a den decoration and I'll figure out what we're going to do with her after that. And then that led to rescuing 56 cats from a fur farm and then 28 from a fur farm and then 22 from a fur farm. And people started calling and saying, will you take my lion? Will you take my tiger? And in every one of those cases, I thought, I can fix this. I can figure out what to do with these animals, take care of these animals, and try to get some laws passed so that people can't get their hands on them. And it's been like nearly 30 years trying to fix this problem that I thought was going to be so easy to fix, and it turned out to be a lot harder than I bargained for.
Right. And I know you've been working on your federal bill, like what, since 1998, was it?
Yeah.
So is it getting any closer to being approved?
It's much closer. In fact, I really thought it was going to pass last year. And then, last year had COVID and Tiger
Yeah.
King and the election. And even with all of that craziness going on, we still managed to get our federal bill before the House for the first time ever for a full floor vote. And we won by a 2/3 margin. And so that was huge. And all it had to do then was go over to the Senate for a hearing. and they didn't call it up in time. And so what happens is every 2 years, if both House and Senate don't vote on it, you have to start over. So we had to start over again in January, but we're further along than we've ever been before. We've got like 195 co-sponsors in the House, and I think about 24 in the Senate. We've got a lot more Republicans than we ever had. So I'm really sure it's going to pass this year.
Okay, well, I hope so, because you've been working on it for a long time. So I really hope that that comes true for you. So recently you were in the blogs because you were a little upset with P. Diddy and some other celebrities about the party they had in Atlanta with the white tiger in the cage. So can you just tell us a little bit how you knew that the tiger was stressed and didn't like the environment he was in?
You can tell when a tiger is like open mouth breathing and it's pacing around in a small area. And it's not so much whether or not the cat was stressed that made that a bad thing. What makes that a bad thing is whenever you take a magnificent wild animal like that and treat it like a party prop, then it sends the wrong message. It tells people that you don't have to worry about saving these animals in the wild. We can bring it to your party. They're not in danger. And they are in danger, and we need to treat them with that respect. And so that was my primary problem with that whole scene.
Okay. So if you couldn't work with big cats, what exactly would you be doing right now?
My first love really is to work on the small cat problem so that there aren't millions of domestic cats being killed in shelters every year. And so I keep thinking I'm getting closer and closer to fixing this big cat problem. And as soon as that's taken care of, then I want to go back to where my heart really calls me, which is the little domestic cats.
Okay. So would you say that COVID impacted your business at all?
Yeah. COVID caused us to shut our gates on March the 15th because we didn't want to take a risk of any of our people catching COVID. And so we were doing everything we were supposed to do as far as like getting masked and washing everything and, being really careful around the cats. And then we learned that cats in zoos were starting to contract COVID and were dying from it. And so we were concerned that that would happen here. And we really stepped up measures to protect the cats. So now, even though people can get vaccinated and our people are vaccinated, there's a new vaccine that's out for the cats, just came out like in the last couple of weeks. But our vet's saying, probably 75% of our cats are over the age of what would be like a 90 to 100-year-old person. And they're not sure whether or not they could withstand the vaccines. And so we're like, which is worse? And so we're kind of weighing that right now. But as a result of being closed, it's costing us over $1 million a year.
That's a lot.
And
That's a lot.
Between $3.5 and $4 million every year just to take care of the cats and do all of the things that we do. And that's like a quarter of our income gone.
So speaking of COVID, so we all know last year when COVID was starting to first hit us around March, Tiger King came out. We were pretty much all on lockdown. We had nothing to do. So most of us binge watched it. And we got a whole lot of, mixed emotions and reviews from it. So how did it feel to become this big viral sensation? Like you had to be probably the most talked about person around that time. So how did that feel to just become viral like that?
It was really weird because the people who abuse big cats, there's no excuse for the things that they do. And so for all these years, they have made allegations that I killed my husband and fed him to the cats. And the reason they do that is because if they're talking to a reporter or a member of the media or even a member of the public, and they start getting questioned about, well, why are you breeding these cats if none of them can ever go back to the wild? And why are you letting people pay to touch these animals? And there's no excuse for that. And so what they'll do instead is try to divert the attention away to something that's so salacious. And in the past, there's only been, say, probably less than 5 reporters who ever did any kind of a story based on those allegations. And everybody else, when they researched it, they found that I was never a person of interest in my husband's disappearance. And if you go down to the court records, you'll see that I dealt very kindly, better with his family than Don ever did. And, just so many things that were said in Tiger King could easily be proven false. And so I haven't had people believing that until Tiger King did such a masterful job of piecing things together so that you're hearing one thing, but you're seeing another thing on the screen. And it really seemed to cause an awful lot of people to believe that I was some kind of gold digging, home wrecking murderer. And as a result, there were a lot of people that were so enraged and felt like they had, absolutely every right to contact me and everybody I know and scream obscenities at us and threaten our lives and threaten to burn the place down and threaten to kill the cats. And I couldn't believe that people would watch a TV show and come away that stirred up without doing any kind of research on their own to find out that they had been misled. So it was a real shock to me, but it was probably a good thing that it happened during COVID because, everywhere that I went, I had a mask on. So I didn't have an awful lot of people coming up to me in person, which was nice. In fact, there was a situation just yesterday or the day before, for the very first time, somebody driving by me, I couldn't tell if they yelled Carole Baskin, F you, or Carole Baskin, I love you. And it would have been the first time that in person somebody has been mean to me since this whole thing happened. A lot of people were mean if they can hide behind a alias or an unlisted phone number or things like that. But in person, everybody's been great. And I had posted that on TikTok, and somebody just reached out to me on Instagram and said, that was me. You were crossing right there at Linebaugh and the Wild Fork. And it was like, yeah, that's where it was. And he said, I did not say F you, I love you. And so it was like, oh, good. Then I still haven't had the first person be mean to me in person.
So you mentioned that, everybody was saying that you allegedly killed your husband and fed him to the cats. So do you think that people were thinking that because you did mention that if somebody wanted to kill someone, put was it sardine oil on them because cats would eat that? So do you think that might have fed into why they were saying that?
A lot of people did. The memes were all about the sardine oil, if you remember that. But think about this for a minute. I mean, if there was somebody that you wanted to kill, would you pour sardine oil on them? How could you kill somebody pouring sardine oil on them?
Maybe kill them first, then pour the oil on them. I don't know.
I mean, what are they going to do? They're like, oh, she poured sardine oil on me. Let me go walk in with tigers. No, nobody does that. I mean, that is like the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my life. And yet so many people, for some reason, thought that that was like the smoking gun and to tell you how that whole thing started, I had taken the producers from Tiger King in our enrichment barn. We have a big barn here, and every Wednesday the volunteers come and they make all kinds of stuff for the cats, all kinds of enrichment. And some of the things that they make are called sardini martinis, where they grind up the sardines in a blender with water and then they freeze it and make little popsicles. Or they have what they call tuna melts, which are tuna fish in the frozen popsicles. And they do it with the meat, the blood that we drain off of the beef. So they have beef sickles. And so we're in that room and the producers are asking me questions. And they said, if you were trying to, and they were talking about the scene in Tiger King where Joe was being dragged around the cage by his foot. Remember when the liger had him, was dragging him around? And they were saying, Joe said that they sprayed perfume on his shoes. And do you think that that would have caused the tiger to attack? And I said, no, because we sprayed perfume on paper mache and toilet paper.
So it's the way they edited it.
Well, and so, the cats, I said, all they do is slobber on it. And they said, well, if you had wanted to kill Joe, what would you have poured on his shoes? And I'm like, you can't pour something on somebody's shoes to kill them. It's just a stupid idea, like I just said. And they just kept asking me over and over. And they're like, well, if you didn't want the cat to just slobber, you wanted the cat to actually lick it or bite it, what would they eat? And there was a big rack of sardines behind them. And I said, I don't know, sardine oil? And that ended up being clipped and pasted, with that little sentence into Tiger King that made everybody think that somehow you could murder somebody with sardine oil, which is just so stupid.
Yeah, and now that you're mentioning that, it did appear that Netflix or the producers were portraying you as this murder villain in Tiger King. So were you aware that they were going to portray you in this light?
No, I had worked with them for 5 years. They had spent time at our home. They had gone to my parents' home with me. And they said that what they were working on was did you watch Blackfish?
No.
It was the film that people saw about the way SeaWorld was treating the killer whales, and then all of a sudden nobody wanted to go to SeaWorld anymore because of the abuse of the killer whales. And so they said they were working on the cat version of that, so that they were going to show all of these people abusing these cubs and ripping them away from their mothers. And they were going to talk about how this was hurting conservation and it was causing the tiger to go extinct in the wild, and all of the things that we've been working on for years. And so that's what they said it was about. And when they asked me, stupid questions or things that Joe would allege about burying my husband under the septic tank or feeding him to the tigers,
or putting him through the meat grinder.
yeah, I mean, that meat grinder had been gone for years before Don disappeared. And everybody here knew it. And we let the producers know that. But instead, what you see is them putting this like gigantic meat grinder when it was a tiny little thing that we had to begin with. You could only put like a chicken leg through it. If it was anything bigger than that, you had to chop it up into like 1-inch cubes. And, by giving people that kind of a visual and not telling the truth, that's how they created that whole concept, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But when they would ask me those questions that Joe would typically say to people about me, I said, why is this important to the issue of protecting big cats? And they said, the bad guys say this stuff about you, so we're just trying to show your side of it. And when Tiger King started, the trailers came out for it before it came out, like a week ahead of time. And we saw that there was this show called Joe Exotic, because they said he was going to be like 10 minutes in this thing. He wasn't a big part of it at all, because there's so many of these guys that are abusing cats. And so it was supposed to be about all of them. And all of a sudden they didn't want to talk to us. And so we binge watched it just like everybody else did, because we were like, what is that show about? How does that have footage of me in it? Because I wasn't working on anything.
Wow. Wow. So they really kind of just betrayed you a little bit. They kind of didn't really, tell you the whole truth. Have you had a chance to speak with the producer since then?
They reached out to me when they started talking about doing a Tiger King 2. They went to all of the people that had been in the show before and were trying to get them to sign contracts. And some of the people came to me and said, these are the contracts that they had me sign that said they can't talk to anybody but the producers of Tiger King. And the reason I think they did that was they don't want anybody else to do like a real investigative piece. There was that's my belief anyway. There's a guy named Louis Theroux with the BBC in the UK, and he's known as being a fair journalist. And so he had tried to do something called Shooting Joe Exotic, because he had all this footage from Joe from back in 2011. And even back in 2011, Joe was talking about hiring a hitman to kill me. And so they realized after Tiger King came out that they had this gold mine of footage of him making threats and being awful. And so they started trying to do a documentary. And what they were finding is all these people had signed up for Tiger King 2 saying they were. And so when they came to me and they were like, we just want to clear the air, I told them, lose my number. Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me.
So what would you have to say to all the critics, the haters, and everybody who keeps constantly saying that you killed your husband? Like, is there something that you would like to say to everybody to kind of just like did that? Because it has to be a little frustrating that everywhere you go, or everyone's always associating that with you. So do you have anything that you would like to say in regards to that?
I actually did a whole page at bigcatrescue.org/Netflix. And the reason I did it was because I ended up watching Tiger King 7 times, because I could not believe that people came away from that show believing that I had killed my husband. I'm like, how did people come to that kind of a conclusion from that show? And so I watched it 7 times. And as I did, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, even when they were allowing me to say something like, I love my husband and I was taking him to the doctor and I was the only person that was protecting him, what they would do is they'd have me say that, and then they'd line up all of these people to say, oh no, she knows more than she's saying, and we believe she knows more than she's saying. And it was like, just, one after the other of people who have absolutely no idea what was going on between Don and I. And the few that had any idea had very little idea of what was going on. And so what I did was I went minute by minute through the entire thing and laid it out for people along with all of the evidence to prove my point of view and to let them know how it was that they were so misled. But I think once somebody has been fooled by something like that, especially if they have gone out and been really mean and been creating memes or sharing memes that were hateful towards somebody, if they find out that they were wrong, that makes it really, really hard for them to come to grips with. And so it's easier to just, stay with the blinders on and say, no, I was right. She's a killer just because I believe it. And it's like, well, none of the evidence backs that up. And that's what the sheriff's office said. I've never even been a person of interest in his disappearance.
Right.
But that's not, and they had that in Tiger King, but that's not the message people came away with because of the clever editing.
Right. So have you had, how has your life changed since Tiger King has aired? Because, being that this is the negative image that people have put onto you, how has your life changed since then, since it's aired?
Well, for the first 3 months, it was really hard because my phone was ringing like every 2 minutes with people being hateful. And our social sites were just constantly, all the people in the comments were just so hateful. And doing live things like this, all of those people that were so misled will come over here and try and prove once again that they were right just by saying it over and over again. Like, if I say it enough times, it's going to make it true. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But, that kind of obnoxious behavior has been difficult for my social team more than anything because they have to go in there and deal with all of the hatefulness and answer all of the questions that people ask as a result of it, like what on earth are these people talking about? And so that's been just a huge hassle. But the good news is that there have been a lot of people that once they did start doing some research on their own and they started looking into these people that almost everybody in Tiger King is now either in jail or being indicted or having their animals taken away from them. And I think that's because they're a pretty wretched bunch of people and not people that you should be taking as your credible witnesses for something like that, especially when most of them never even met Don. So, it's been a hassle as far as that goes. The good things that have come out of it, though, is that because of the name recognition, it's given me a bigger platform to be able to talk about why it is that cub petting, which is the main thing that drives the abuse, is so abusive. People saw that one scene in Tiger King where the mother is like still delivering the cubs and they're pulling the cub out of the den box with that metal hook and dragging it across the rocks and then squeezing its poor little head through the wire. And that was an everyday occurrence at these places. And the reason they did it is because people would pay to touch a cub or to have them have a cub at one of their events. And as long as people would pay to do that, these people were going to fulfill that market. And they did not like the fact that I'm going to bring that to an end. And, for all of the grief that they've been able to cause me, they're not going to be able to thwart me from ending that abuse. And I think that this platform has made it possible for me to move that forward.
Okay. So you were awarded Joe's old property last year. I saw that you won in a lawsuit. What are your plans to do with the 16 acres of land?
Yeah, that lawsuit was from 2012. I've been chasing him through bankruptcy court all these years. And we did get awarded the zoo, and we actually already sold it. So we sold it, I think, for like $160,000 or $140,000. I think it might have been $140,000. And we sold it with the agreement that follows in the deed that it can never be used for exotic animals again. So we didn't want anybody just filling those cages up again with more suffering tigers.
So you mentioned that, Joe did hire someone to kill you. So he's currently serving his time. So when there was talks about pardons from Donald Trump, did you ever think that he was going to be one of the ones to be pardoned?
It worried me because I think that would have been a good way for President Trump to deflect attention away from the things that people were talking about him and make them talk about Joe because people love to talk about Tiger King. And I really was surprised that he didn't do something to try and divert attention in that way, but I'm very glad that he didn't.
Okay, so I was looking at your Instagram post that you shared from ET, a comment that your husband Howard had made about that if Joe came out to support the Big Cat Public Safety Act, that he would be willing to urge a lighter sentence for Joe. First of all, did he really say that?
Yeah, and both of
Okay.
us said it actually. Joe could have been sentenced for 80 years. The judge only
Wow.
gave him 22. And so I think the judge was trying to be as fair as he possibly could, given the gravity of the things that Joe was convicted of. But both my husband and I said that, you know, if Joe really wanted to either get a pardon or to reduce his fine, reduce his sentence, then the things that he would need to do would be to turn in all of his co-conspirators, because they always, you know, everybody always wants the bigger fish, and
Right.
to work to pass this federal bill that would ban the cub petting and all of the abuse if he really felt like, you know, if he had really had a change of heart. And so Joe said, if you read the headlines, he said that he was calling my bluff, and that he was going to call my bluff so that he would get this pardon or this reduced sentence. And then he said, but we shouldn't ban cub petting, and I'm not turning in my friends. Well, it was like, those are the only two things we asked him to do. So where did he call my bluff?
Well, yeah, I guess he'll be serving those 22 years. So I want to know, so you were in agreement with your husband on that statement, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if he
Okay.
would really have a change of heart and really bring in the people that, because I feel like, I believe that Joe was just the dumbest one of these animal exploiters that has been out to kill me for years. And that's how he got caught and why he was so easy to convict. If you actually look at the trial transcripts, not what people say online or the way that Tiger King tried to make it like he was framed or something, the transcripts and the jurors have all said Joe killed himself with his own mouth. I mean, the things that he said and they heard him say about that he was hiring these two guys and the cats that he had killed and all of that, they said that it was really easy to make that conviction off for the
Wow.
people to justice or to support the bill. Then why should he get a reduction in his sentence?
So if you had the opportunity, would you be willing to have a peaceful conversation with Joe?
I have never spoken to Joe. And the whole idea that there was this huge feud between us is like the beginning of the lies that people were told in Tiger King. Apparently, back in like 2006, there was a newspaper reporter that had talked about some lion cubs that were born deformed at Joe's park. And the reporter called me and he said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, sanctuaries don't breed cats. I don't know what else to tell you. And I didn't know Joe from anybody at that point in time. And from that day forward, people who know him say that he has had my name on his lips like every day since then, how much he hates me, how much he wants to silence me, how much he wants me gone. And for me, it's always been about the issues, you know, actually ending the abuse and saving these cats in the wild. So I've never had a conversation with him in the past. I don't know that there would be any point to talk to him in the future, because I believe everything he says is just for his own aggrandizement, and I don't believe he can be trusted. I think the way, you know, if he wanted to have a conversation with me, he needs to do the right thing first. He needs to help law enforcement put the rest of those guys behind bars. He needs to actually help us pass this federal bill. Once he does that, talk to him all day long. But he's never going to do that, because that's not what I don't think that's what he wants.
Right. So have you seen any of the YouTube videos that he tried to troll you with? Like, did you ever pay attention to any of those things? Have you seen the video he did called Here Kitty Kitty?
My husband would actually watch his little YouTube channel every day, and he would gather evidence. And so that was how we had so much evidence over the years against him, because Joe's his own worst enemy. And as a result of my husband watching all of that, thank God I didn't have to. So there were some clips that, of course, I saw at the trial, and some that I had seen beforehand. You know, like my husband had shown me the one where he was shooting the doll and shooting the mannequin and blowing people up and trying to.
Yeah, he had a lot of weird videos.
Yeah.
He was definitely obsessed with you. So I saw you had a podcast, Cat Chat. Is that what it's called? How's that going?
The Cat Chat show was something that I did actually years ago, and I haven't done a podcast. I haven't done a Cat Chat show podcast in, it's probably been a couple of years. I've been for the last year, a little over a year, doing my personal diary. So there were so many people in Tiger King who said she knows more than what she's saying. You know, that seemed to be like the big theme that people wanted to put out there. And so I've written a diary since I was a kid, and I put the whole thing out there. And I said, here's everything I knew, every stupid thought that even went through my head, everything that was going on. Here it is. Look at it. See what you think. And you know, as a result, there's only like 14,000 people that have subscribed to it versus 64 million people who saw the Tiger King version and think what they think based on that. So the truth is out there for anybody that cares to look. It's just people don't want to be educated. They wanted to be entertained, and they don't want to believe that they were wrong.
And I understand that. I don't know how much time you have, Carole, but there's quite a few questions in the question box. So I'm going to kind of just scroll through and see if there's any worth asking. Do you have a few minutes to take some viewers' questions?
Sure. You got some serious eyelashes.
Oh, thank you. So I have a question from Cheryl6230. It says, what is it that others can do to help to show the importance of rescuing big cats?
The best thing anybody can do if they are a U.S. citizen is go to bigcatact.com. And what we do there is if you put in your address, it will locate for you your senators and your representative, and we give you a little script that you can either say in a phone call, or you can email it, or you can tweet it. And the best thing would be to do all three. And so it's to pass the federal bill that we've been talking about, and it lets everybody who does that is letting their member of Congress know that they want to protect big cats.
Okay. I'm not sure if you want to answer any more questions about Don, but somebody wants to know, well, Real Mel Major wants to know, where do you think he went?
I think he crashed over the Gulf. And
that's what I think. I think that too.
You know, Occam's razor is that the simplest answer is probably the truth. And you know, there were a whole lot of different theories that I had at the time because he was involved with a lot of really bad people and he was suffering from dementia. So I just didn't know whether he might have been abducted or robbed or whatever. But I think the thing that makes the most sense is that he didn't have a pilot's license. He could just barely read and write at about a first grade level. And so that's why he couldn't pass the written exam to get the license. Plus, he got caught taking off and landing at a closed airport because he didn't know that it was closed or didn't care that it was closed, and that's not legal. And so for years, he flew airplanes, even though he wasn't licensed, and that meant he had to take off from airports that were closed. He couldn't do it when they were open because they'd be like, who's that guy leaving in that plane? He can't do that.
Right. And his car was found at the airport, right? Yeah.
And he couldn't fly over 200 feet because if you go up over 200 feet, there's a transponder in the plane. And even if there's not, they'll pick it up on radar. And so then they'd be like, well, who is that guy? There's no flight plan for that thing out there. What is that? And so by virtue of the fact of him taking off so early from the airport there, he would go out, fly out over the Gulf because there it's more stable than if you're flying over buildings and trees. There's a lot of updrafts and downdrafts over land. But over the water, it's flat, so it's a lot smoother flying. And if you're at 200 feet, you're feeling every updraft and downdraft. And so if he took off, went out over the Gulf and crashed, that would explain why we've never found any wreckage, never found any trace of him, never had anybody come forward and say that they knew anything about it.
Right.
It just makes any sense to me.
That logically makes the most sense to me. That's kind of what I've been saying. I was like, I think maybe he might have crashed into like the ocean or something. I'm still I'm still an asshole wants to know, do you think that Joe really wanted to kill you, or was it just a scare tactic?
I believe him. And the reason I believe him is even though he was only convicted on the 2 counts that people know about in Tiger King, back in 2011, when Louis Theroux was there, he was talking about a hitman. In 2015, 2 different women called me and said that Joe had tried to pay them to kill me, and they just freaked out about it. And I turned that over to law enforcement at the time that it happened, but nothing ever came of it. And so I know that there have been other people that he has tried to get to kill me that obviously did not.
Okay. So what do you have against people owning tigers? Someone asked in the comments because they said they wanted to buy a tiger. So what would be your suggestion against that? Like what is wrong with owning a pet tiger?
There's so much wrong with owning a pet tiger. But the main thing is, I believe that tigers belong to all of us, and they belong in the wild. And as long as we keep them in cages, whether they be in zoos or in people's backyards, people are never going to do the important work necessary to protect them in the wild. I mean, why would anybody care about protecting the wild if they can pay $10 and see one at the zoo, or if they can go over to the friend's house and see one for free? And we owe it to ourselves as human beings that require a planet that is healthy to protect those apex predators, because when you don't have those umbrella species that are protecting the forest, then there are too many herbivores that end up eating all of the plants and the trees, and the entire ecosystem collapses. So in order to protect the tiger for all of us, I think we all need to sacrifice our own desire to be close to them. And, people love to say that I'm a hypocrite because I have tigers in cages, but I don't breed tigers. I've never bred tigers, never bred lions. And I, I want there to never be another cat that needs to be rescued. I want the cats who live here at Big Cat Rescue to die of old age, and I want to give them the best life I can during that period of time that they have to be in a cage, because it's not legal to turn a captive bred cat loose, which is another huge misconception people have. They think you can breed it, play with it, and then turn it back loose in the wild. It's like, no, that's not legal. That would never work. And as a result, it's just causing the extinction of the tiger. So I'm hoping that one day all of my cages will be empty, and that we will be protecting cats in the wild where they belong.
So yeah, you're not really a big fan of zoos, circuses, and aquariums. So I see the Real Great Jones is asking your opinion on what do you think the likelihood of them banning zoos or circus and aquariums? Like, do you think that'll ever happen?
Most other countries have already banned circus acts that use animals. The US is just way behind everybody else. But I don't think it's so much that it has to be banned. I think that today's generation does not want to see these animals languishing in cages like they have in the past, because we know more now. People have a cell phone. They can go into these places. They can show images of how these cats live when nobody's looking. Like when zoos are closed at night, those cats aren't living in those multi-million-dollar environments that you saw them in during the day. They get locked up in a little jail cell that has no windows, no bars to the outside, and that's where they spend the most active part of their life, is locked up in that prison cell. That's not fair. And once people know that, they're not going to support that. So, I mean, it's probably more than what you want to get into on this podcast, but the way I see us saving the tiger in the wild is by putting remote controlled internet streaming 360 cameras in their environment, and everybody uses a headset to see those cats living free where they live in the wild. And all of that should be monetized to where the money goes back into those local economies to protect the animals who live in that area, so that everybody in the world can enjoy them. And that's what's going to cause us to save the entire planet. And I think that's what zoos are going to have to do. it's not because somebody's going to ban zoos, it's because they're not going to have any visitors. Everybody's going to be going over and doing the cool stuff where you can actually see the animals living free and doing what they do in the wild versus seeing some captive animal languishing in a cage.
Okay. So what do you have coming up next? Like, what's next for you moving forward?
The federal bill passing is my primary concern. And I just got through writing thank you notes to all of the 200 plus members of Congress who have already signed on to the bill as co-sponsors. When people go to bigcatact.com, what they're asking their member of Congress to do is become a co-sponsor. So I'm doing everything that I can with that. I just came back from Washington, D.C., where we had a premiere of another film that we had been working on during that same period that we were working with the producers of Tiger King. And it's called The Conservation Game, with the focus on con. And it talks about how this huge big cat problem in America started. People saw that and thought, oh, that's cool. I want to be that guy. I want to walk a tiger on a leash. And that's what led to all of these people like Joe Exotic and Doc Antle and Mario Dubrow, all of these guys just breeding dozens and dozens and dozens of big cats every year for people to have their fantasy. And then there's nowhere for those animals to go. And they end up being killed, used for their parts, ending up in horrible situations. And so that the conservation game should come out soon. I don't know where it's going to come out soon, but we're hearing that they're going to be taking it to several different theaters and doing like a big release out in LA that should be good. And I'm working on a new show. We're filming a pilot for a show that I can't talk about yet, but it'll be covering the kind of work that we've always done here at the sanctuary, which is finding out where the animal abusers are and exposing them to the public, and then leading law enforcement to actually take action to do something about it.
Kind of what Netflix producers should have been doing, right?
I think people would still watch that. You know, I mean, Tiger King was a dumpster fire that you couldn't turn away from because there was just such a crazy number of people doing crazy, stupid things. But I think if people saw the level of torture that these animals go through, and they saw that there are people out there working with us that are trying to end that, I think people would be all about watching that.
Okay. Carole, just a random question. Are you a vegetarian?
I am a vegetarian. I really strive toward veganism, but I do every once in a while have a milkshake, or I have butter in my coffee.
Okay. I was wondering because normally when people are very passionate about animals, they don't eat them. So yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's definitely been our time. I appreciate you so much, Carole, for tapping in with me, sitting down on my talk series, Talks with Tia.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Carole Baskin, and I've been having tea with Tia.
Thank you so much, Carole, for joining me. It's been a great talk. Hope everyone has enjoyed, you learned something. And no, Carole did not kill her husband, so stop saying it. All right. Have a good night. Thank you, Carole.
Thank you, Tia.
All right. Bye-bye.